Hello there. Today's video is the latest in our series of conversations, and this week I'm delighted to say that I've got Graham Sumner to come on and talk about his work on not simply researching but illustrating the Roman army and also other periods of history as well. Now, many of you will know Graham's work, even if you don't recognize the name immediately. I think you'll recognize the style very quickly. And apart from his own books, there's Roman Warriors, where I wrote an introduction, and Simon Elliott, that we had on earlier in this series, did the main text. You also have a lot of Osprey books, several of those. You've got Ancient Warfare, the, is it bi-monthly magazine? I don't think it's monthly. That covers a very broad range of aspects, and they're supporting one as well, which is The Ancient World or something, the one that's less overtly military. Graham's quite often, his works appeared in those, sometimes writing the article, but more often than not doing the illustration. So you'll see this very distinctive there. His people have a much greater variety of faces. They don't simply look like pretty people doing things and all looking rather the same. He's also, it's been a succession. Illustration's always very important for trying to imagine what the world was like, and particularly putting together all the different pieces of equipment discovered archaeologically based on the sculptures from the ancient world and trying to put that together. You could do so much with reenactment and reconstruction, and that's obviously very, very useful, and that's something that Graham himself has done as well in the past. So he understands that side of things. But there's an element where, excuse me, Gussie wants to go out. There you go, Gus. No, you're not going to let us know your presence by a meow, but there we go. He's on his morning constitutional at the moment, having been out in the garden to sniff things and scratch things, and has now come back into the house to do the same. Reenactment, there are obviously limitations in terms of numbers. There's it's an expensive hobby. You can't test a lot of the stuff to destruction. Oh, there he goes. You might get a distant meow in the background. He does make a brief appearance during the conversation. He decided to come in while I was filming it, and I hauled him up and put him on camera, though he was silent, I think in awe of our guest. With reenactment as well, you're not always physically the same in terms of size. You're a modern person with a modern diet. You're often considerably older than the character, in a sense, you're reenacting, and you don't fight each other. You don't risk death. You know, there are limits to what you can do. So it's useful, but there's always an element of let's go further than that. And let's put on some of the stuff that we don't quite know how to reconstruct yet, or is too expensive to reconstruct, and let's try that, and let's put it in a proper setting. You know, it's all very well marching up and down in Caerleon Amphitheatre. The Omen Street Guard, for instance, they have put on some marvellous shows there in the past and at other sites. But apart from on those rare occasions when you're in and around reconstructed Roman buildings, you've got that limit. But also, of course, you know, there's only so far reconstruction can go. Illustration is more like making a film, making a TV drama, and trying to make it look far more authentic. Make the audience buy that you're actually in that time, rather than looking at people demonstrating how things used to be done, how things used to look. And Graham's work in particular, building on from, you know, great influence of mine, I think more than anyone else, the person who got me really excited by the Roman army was Peter Connolly, with his combination of wonderful illustrations backed by research, understanding what he was trying to show and developing it as well as things went along. You know, his ideas changed as his research changed, as other people's research and ideas came through, being very much part of that research community that's trying to understand that. When you're an illustrator who's not simply given a brief that, right, this is what I want, which is essentially what people are doing now with AI, with predictably rather bland and not very authentic results. The illustration of the army changes as our understanding of the army develops, and will continue to change because there will be more discoveries, there will be more developments. So I wanted today, once Graham said he was happy to do this, we wanted to talk about a range of things, but also some of our usual themes. How do you get interested in the first place? All of this sort of thing. And you'll have to forgive us as well. We haven't seen each other for a while, so it was two old friends catching up and having a chat, because I met Graham, I think probably at the Roman Army School in Durham some time ago, and then we'd bump into each other at various times, but I haven't been around doing that sort of thing for a while, so we hadn't chatted just for a while. And because we have similar interests apart from the Roman army, it just as I say, but that's again, the aim of these videos is that we're, imagine yourself just sitting down with us over a mug of tea, a cup of coffee, whatever your choice, and just talking shop, talking about the things that get us excited, talking about our passions, our fascination with the past. So Graham has done a lot of stuff. He's done particularly moving beyond simply the armor, the helmets, the equipment to, well, what else are soldiers wearing? What's the clothing? How does that work? And he's done a lot of very interesting pioneering stuff in that respect. But beyond that, there's lots of other things. He forgot to mention this, and I forgot to ask him during when we were doing the video. He was historical consultant on a Croatian movie, Illyricum, which I'm not sure whether it still is. It was on Amazon for a while, and I've been meaning to look up, but I haven't got around to. There's also, now this is somewhere I haven't visited yet, the park in the past near Wrexham in North Wales, so other end of the country to me. They are developing a full-size auxiliary base, Roman auxiliary base. They're trying to reconstruct that. You can see from these pictures what's there at the moment. You've got some of the ramparts, you've got Gateway, you've got Principia. It's not a full auxiliary fort because that would be very big. It's based on one of the outpost forts that are a bit smaller that don't have an entire unit stationed there. But Graham was involved from early on in this and developing some of the concept art where they were trying to think, well, what can they actually do? So he mentioned, which again, we should have talked about, but we didn't get around to because we got distracted by talking about movies and all sorts of other things. He did the concept art for that, and then the director, a chap called Paul Harston, wanted to come up with a plan that had basically all the elements of a fort, but was practical. They could actually afford to build. They had the space to build. So it's based on Crawford, the outpost fort there. And here's Graham's illustration to show what, they were giving the idea of this is what they're going for. So this is something where, again, you're taking things to a more practical step when you actually illustrate something and you put your money where your mouth is. You decide this is what I'm going to go for. All those bits where as a historian I can say, well, we're not quite sure how they did this. We're not quite sure what they looked like. We don't know what colour this was. In the illustration, you've got to make a decision. Similar to writing a novel in some ways, when it's based on the past. This is going even further where you're part of a team and you're within the development program of something that's going to be tangible, that's going to be put there. And once you've built it, it's much harder, more expensive to change. So again, you really are putting your money where your mouth is. So that's somewhere I was hoping to get up there this summer because I'd only heard of it fairly recently and the pictures look fabulous. It'll probably have to be next spring or summer. I think it's more of these outdoor things are generally better done at that time of year, and it's finding the time to get up there. It's a sort of four-hour drive or so. So to do that and that twice in a day is it's nice to have the lighter evening so you can see what you're doing. Finally, one detail that he didn't mention, and this shows my ignorance that I wasn't asking about the more technical side of painting. Graham works in gouache, I think it's pronounced as. It's the water-based paints that are stronger, more, they're not simply watercolors. That's his work, and you can see. If you go back to some of my earlier videos, you will actually see in the background a painting of a late Severan cavalryman, a heavily armored, sort of early Roman cataphract, basically, was in the background behind. I've now got that up on the wall in the lounge, properly framed, so it's not so easy to cart around, so you're left with my DVDs and books behind there. But anyway, as usual, introduction has gone on far longer than I intended, but then Graham's done a lot of things and is interested in lots of various aspects, as you will see from the discussion that follows. So here we are. This is our latest in conversation with, and today it's Graham Sumner. Well, today I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Graham Sumner to the channel. So Graham, how are you? Thank you so much for coming on.
Hello, thank you. Greetings from North Wales.
Yes, North Wales to South Wales this week.
Saw you, yes.
Yes, exactly. We used to catch up, as I mentioned in the introduction. We'd see each other at the Conference of Durham, the Roman Army School there, every year for quite a while, and other, now and again. But it's been a while since lockdowns, and I haven't been able to go and all that sort of thing. It's been a while, so it's been lovely. We actually had one chat in preparation for this and had so much fun that if this video wanders a little bit around, it's just because we're enjoying ourselves. But the whole point of these is to make them natural, like a conversation. And the idea is we're all sitting down over a cup of tea or coffee or something like that and
talking shop, talking about the things that fascinate us, that excite us, that interest us. So, as with everybody else I've had on this series, Graham, I'd like to begin with, let's go back to the young Graham and how and why history became an interest, and then particularly eventually the Romans. So we'll talk a bit about that first, then we'll talk a bit about more the artistic side of why it runs. So where did it all begin for you?
Well, I was at that generation where there was a whole range of programs on television in the early 1960s, which dealt with history. So I could have become interested in quite a variety of periods. Initially Westerns, they were still showing the reruns of the old 1950s Westerns TV series. And I remember Cheyenne was a particular favorite. But I was also interested in films on television which showed the US cavalry. So that was an initial interest in history and the military. And then also TV programs like The Adventures of Robin Hood and Ivanhoe and William Tell. So I could have become a medieval historian if that had followed on. But then in a family holiday, we went to London in about 1964, and we saw the fall of the Roman Empire on a huge screen on a big cinema in London, and in color, of course, because we were still used to small black and white televisions. And that literally blew me away. I don't know why, because I was only 4 or 5 at the time. And as we know, we look back at it, it's quite a boring film. For
there's a lot of conversations and not much happening, and staring out at forests and this sort of thing.
But I was very interested in the costumes. That particularly that struck me, and also the very dark, moody atmosphere in the beginning of the film. So that's inspired a lot of my later paintings, which are in the snow or they've got dark clouds and things like that. So that carried through. So yes, and then of course you've got games, model figures. You can see some things behind, which
there's the,
like
the epic Smile Castle, that classic, which is a marvelous set.
So yes, so I think the first set I ever bought with were bought for me with World War I German troops.
With the Pickelhauben,
which at some point later on became converted into British figures from Zulu, because I think a lot of models used to do those in that period.
Yes, I think it was even recommended. There was a Donald Featherstone book, Skirmish Wargaming, that even recommed that's where you find your British for the.
But you needed to buy an awful lot of the Tarzan sets.
Yes,
to get your Zulus.
Respectable number.
4 in a packet, so.
So it is. I mean, it's so often it's films and things that's by, and the sheer scale of those epics that were meant to be spectacular, because that clearly was the case with the fall of the empire. And it's an odd scene, really, but the one that I think always struck in my mind was the funeral of Marcus Aurelius, when they're in the snow, and it's all about what's he called? Stephen Boyd's character passing over to Christopher Plummer, to Commodus, the torch to cremate, and saying, I'm not going to succeed to your father, I'm not going to challenge you. So, but something about that, Roman soldiers in the snow with this howling wind and this sort of, they're making these mourning sounds. I'm not sure how historically accurate it is, but it just is very powerful. It's stuck in my mind ever since I saw that as a kid, probably on one Christmas time or bank holiday of some sort, where the BBC tended to show that sort of film in the afternoons. And suddenly I saw these Romans and got excited. So we'll flash up as well to show your sympathies at the time, an early picture of Graham as one of the opponents of the 7th Cavalry, because you've said that, and we've got there's the Little Bighorn. Is that the board game behind you in the box?
Yes.
That and the drama, and then there is something intensely dramatic about these, the Last Stand and your characters, even the heroes of your film, being wiped out as part of it, makes it a dramatic story. So
I used to do that a lot with my plastic figures from Woolworths. That they used to be surrounded quite a lot and played in a circle numerous times.
But it's the same as Thermopylae.
I suppose we look at that photograph of me now as an Indian, but it's clearly a Plains Indian chief. But he's supposed to be Chingachgook.
Oh, right, okay.
The last of the
Mohicans, yes.
He's wearing the wrong costume.
Well, it's rather like there are photographs of Geronimo, aren't there, in captivity, dressed up, looking more like a plains one with the bonnet and everything, rather than the Apache, you know, Chiricahua he was. So it's I suppose even at the time there was this mingling of what was real, what was vaguely in the sort of same continent, but not really as precise as,
there's
that.
There's a fascinating movie on Netflix, I think, called Real Engine.
Oh, yeah.
Real as in REEL.
Yeah.
It's all about cinematic depictions of the Indians going back from the very earliest days right up until modern times. And yes, there was just a stereotypical Indian that was with a headband and the feathers. And that's applied to all Indians throughout the West. Of course, we know there was a huge diversity of different tribes and costumes. And it's the same with the Romans. With the Roman movies, we still have this stereotypical image of a Roman soldier. And now we've got AI. It seems to be ignoring everything we've done for the last 50 years and going right back to the early Hollywood movies again.
Yes, it's true. I suppose it's so there's so much of that material out there, and that's the stuff that's likely to be used to train, or whatever they call it, the programs. But yes, there are certain myths that are so deeply entrenched that I don't think all our best work is ever going to dislodge them. They have a life of their own now. It's almost as if people have decided that's how the past should have been, regardless of how it was.
The poor late Roman army has a very poor PR image.
Yes. So the Old West, Custer and the 7th Cavalry, all the drama of that, and even I'm a little bit younger, that there was still a lot of it on TV, along with American detective shows. Nearly everybody seemed to be either a PI or a policeman in America. That was my view of the world. If you weren't a cowboy and had been around 100 years ago, then you were probably in the police force or fighting crime in some respect or other during my childhood. But so you saw the fall of the Roman Empire. The Romans started to grow. How did you come to think about more interested in the Romans, but also illustrating and painting, those sort of things? And how did your sort of professional career in that sense get started?
Well, again, it was a question of timing, and like growing up with all those programs on television, which you don't have now. There was also a series of illustrated magazines for children, and the most famous being Look and Learn.
Yes, I remember that one.
There was Tell Me Why and World of Wonder, which were all very similar. And they were all filled with illustrations. And of course, over time, and perhaps even in later years, I gradually found out who these illustrators were. There were certain ones which were popping up all of the time. And I eventually found out details about them. And of course, again, unlike today, you could instantly recognize a particular artist's work, and several of them stood out. Several of them would then go on and become Osprey men-at-arms illustrators and become even more well-known. And that spread their work into the 70s and the 1980s. So they were all early influences on my life. And obviously one of the most famous ones being the Ladybird books.
Yes. Again, a common theme of these conversations. Gareth Glover, who works in the Napoleonic Wars, was talking about the Ladybird of Nelson, and I remember the one which we'll put up the picture now of Julius Caesar in Roman Britain. It was very exciting. I'm ashamed now to admit that there were maps at the front and the back, and I crossed out the H on Hadrian's Wall, so it became Hadrian's Wall. That was long before I'd even seen the thing. I'd claimed it. So if nobody else knows, it's mine. That's English heritage. Sorry, nothing to do with that. Were you always one of those children with a pen in your hand or a brush in your hand? Were you always?
Yes, I was drawing a lot. I remember in school we had to do a project. We had to draw a Roman soldier or something like that, and I thought, oh, I know what Roman soldiers look like. Well, this is when I was 8, and of course it was just a classic Ben-Hur Quo Vadis style Roman. And it wasn't until the 1970s, of course, that suddenly Peter Connolly's book came out, and that completely revolutionized what we think Roman soldiers look like again for the last 50 years.
Should we go back a little and look at some of those earlier artists?
Yes,
because you were talking about how the influence of Forestier and people like that, and
well, Forestier, he was born in 1854 and lived until 1930. So obviously, you would think his work was well in the past, but I think it was still being used in the magazines like Look and Learn and Tell Me Why. He'd been born in Paris, but spent most of his working life in Britain. And he did a lot of archaeological reconstructions and worked for the Illustrated London News in that sort of early period of time. And uniquely amongst illustrators, he got knighted for his work. I don't think you hear of illustrators being knighted.
No, they're not.
We just don't get awards.
No, sadly. Well, it's not much for authors either, I'm afraid. It's well, I was the thing that struck me was when you put up the still, which we'll show now from, now I know it's the one that introduces Khan, but Star Trek, the original series, where you have suddenly they have, and I think William Shatner as Captain Kirk makes some dismissive comment about, oh, at last we'll have some use for that historian they put us, and there's this lieutenant who's painting these pictures, and there's a legionary, and behind that a gladiator. But I'd always wondered, but putting them together, you can see this is based very clearly on that original. So which even then in late 60s was quite an old view of the Roman army.
Well, it was actually based on a mannequin, I think, which was in the museum, Paris Saint-Germain.
Yes.
They had this life-size mannequin, and then there was illustrations drawn from that, which became quite popular. And funnily enough, in our local museum here, I practically begged them to use one of my illustrations of a Roman soldier. And what do they use? They use that very, very illustration,
right,
from the about 1900. So it still gets used. It's still around, and as we say, it now gets picked up by AI. But yes, it's fascinating to see it on the Starship.
Exactly. Yes, it's the it had always struck me, even as a kid, that both the pictures, they're Romans. That's which is interesting. But I suppose that again, it's that visual recognition. It's one of the problems that the AI will reinforce, that everybody's got this clear idea of what a Roman soldier looked like, or a gladiator for that matter.
That's right. Yeah.
And that means that you can put them up and people know. So as a visual thing for storytelling, it's so much easier for them. They think, the audience is going to know where we're supposed to be, what's going on, all this sort of thing. So it's odd. I mean, he was interesting because at least that armor is shown as metal.
Yes, yeah.
Rather than the leather that you got so often.
What's fascinating for me is that I've got a book on the shelf here, which is The Blandford History of Ancient Uniforms.
Oh, right.
Which came out in 1972. And all the Roman soldiers are in leather armor.
Yeah.
Something that's literally the same time that Russell Robinson worked on the armor from Corbridge and suddenly revolutionized this idea of Roman armor. Peter Connelly, who worked with him, produced their own books in 1972, 1974. You still have this leather armor publication is still relevant or prevalent. And of course, there are still people today, some of the people that you see work in Osprey books still like to think of leather armor being used.
Yes.
It's still one of those ongoing debates.
It's an odd thing. I suppose you can always understand how there's a delay from, a book comes out for specialists in the field, even though, the armor of Imperial Rome, Russell Robinson, it's very accessible. But it is quite detailed. You have to be interested to. But then it takes a while. And I suppose one of the problems we have as well is because it's considered so far in the past, people think, well, nothing much can have changed. If I look at a book from 1900 or a book from 2000, the information will basically be there. So you have those, the drawings based on Trajan's column or the column of Marcus Aurelius that then get transferred in various ways. Or I remember even having some toy soldiers, I can't remember, that were passed on to me. I don't know what make they were, that had obviously been based on column of Marcus Aurelius. And that's
the Urfix figures, of course, were based on reconstructions by Lyndon Schmidt at the end of the 19th century, some figures in leather armor with the little leather shorts.
Yes, the shorts that were looked rather sort of frilly and generally just strange. But
that's what the Urfix figures were based on. So I don't know whether you painted yours as leather or whether they're in silver to represent metal.
Remember now. I first had some when I probably didn't paint them at all, and just had because the shields you had to stick on, they were on a little sort of knob thing to go in, and would fall off all the time during your games, or could be made to fall off if this was some dramatic moment in your story, as the Britons were trying to storm the Roman Mile Castle. But of course, again, there were more Romans in the set than there were Britons, so the poor old Britons had their work cut out for them trying this against.
I suppose one of the problems most people do is they just buy thousands and thousands of figures and then realize they've got to paint them.
Yes, exactly.
But this was what was interesting with Forestier back in his book, is he released this book just before he died, called The Roman Soldier. So it's 1927, I think, or 1924 it came out.
Yeah.
And he shows Roman soldiers from earliest days right up until the sort of fall of the Roman Empire period. And they're all different. And he's one of the very few artists who did that.
You do feel, I mean, his research was pretty good for the time.
It was.
You know, we forget how much we've discovered since then that changed and keep on, you know. I mean, both of us, I suspect, particularly me, I'm sometimes caught out because I haven't realized that something's been reinterpreted in the last couple of years. Somebody's pushing this line now, or there's a new discovery that something that was rare has now become, actually, we've identified some of these in an old collection, or another one's been excavated. So it's evolving all the time, in the sense, and constantly being reassessed. So
I had that with one of my recent illustrations, and an archaeologist said, "Why have you painted him with a cavalry helmet?" And I said, "Well, it is a cavalry helmet according to Russell Robinson." And he said, "No, with our latest research, we think these are infantry helmets now." And I pointed out, well, actually, in the Fall of the Roman Empire movie, these infantrymen are wearing these helmets, so therefore they must have got that right.
Yes, even if by chance and again, and there's obviously an element of guesswork and the whole. We've lost poor old John Coulston a couple of years ago, but I think there's talk of another edition of Bishop and Coulston's, which remains the first step. First and often the second and the third and even the last stopping place where you're looking something like that up, because they brought so much together and assessed it so clearly. But even then, there's a lot we don't know. There's a lot where you're guessing, and debates over differences between legionaries and auxiliaries and all this sort of thing become quite complicated. So let's go back to some of the other artists, and another one is Alan Sorrell, of course, is one of those.
I was doing them chronologically.
Oh, sorry. Well, let's go back to that. That's fine. I'm going from memory, which in my case is always shaky.
It was Fortunino Matania.
Ah, yes. No, I didn't.
And, he was an Italian from Naples, and he was 1881 to 1963.
Okay.
So again, he was his later work was appearing in Look and Learn and Tell Me Why. So that's where I probably saw some of his works. There's a famous one he did of the Battle of Hastings, and it's a little bit like the Vikings in the movie, where you have the Vikings are in the 9th century, but when they encounter the English, they're suddenly in the 12th.
Yes, yeah.
Obviously that was for movie audiences, because probably they would have looked the same and it would have confused everyone. And he has this painting of the last stand of Harold at Hastings, and the Normans are very accurately done. But again, the English Saxons or whatever is sort of medieval of armor, and that's a very rare instance with Matania's work, because normally he was very meticulous in his research, and he was prolific, and he didn't just do ancient subjects. He did everything. He did Edgar Rice Burroughs, Princess of Mars, and John Carter.
Right.
He also did contemporary news items, because the newspapers still relied on illustrators at that period rather than photographs. So you've got paintings of the sinking of the Titanic. It was very up to date. And then he did an awful lot of illustrations in the First World War. Some of his most famous ones will be, there's a little boy in Belgium, and he's sticking his tongue out at a German soldier who's walking past. And this is sort of seen as some sort of heroic image. And then the famous one of a World War I Tommy, and he's cradling his dead horse, his head in his arms, which is a very popular and famous image of his. But then he also went on to do railway posters, and there's some originals in the Southport Museum, one of his railway posters to Southport. So he just did everything, and there's just thousands and thousands of work that he did. So I consider him one of the greatest illustrators.
So I'd not heard his name before, but looking at the images you sent, I was thinking, oh yes, I know that.
Yeah,
I've seen that. And the style.
The
is very distinctive, isn't it?
Because
Look and Learn was still around when I was a boy, so I remember that. So I suspect in those I saw quite a few of them.
You'll have seen them. Yes, they'll be there in the back of the head somewhere. And yes, there's been a resurgence of interest. So there's quite a few books that have come out on him lately, which I've bought several. And it's even possible to buy some of his original artwork as well. So I've got a couple of small sketches of his on the walls at home.
Oh, right.
I'm just looking through the notes here. So yes, the next one will be Alan Sorrell. So he was 1904 to 1974, and sadly he died just as I was becoming interested in archaeological illustrations. So he'd worked a lot in the past, and he'd met some archaeologists when he was doing reconstructions of Leicester. I think it was being excavated. Some of the forum or the bathhouse at Leicester was being excavated, and he was asked to do some illustrations for that. And then the Second World War intervened, and he joined the RAF, and he was responsible for camouflaging airfields. So he did an awful lot of aerial surveys, and that obviously stood him in good stead when he was doing these aerial views reconstructions later in life. And he was also asked to target sites as well, to pick out sites for the bombing. And he refused to do any which would damage historical sites. So as a punishment, he was sent to Blackpool to work over there. So I found that was interesting. And he worked in a style that was known as neo-romanticism. And he'd worked with several famous artists from Britain that we know of today, like the likes of Paul Nash and Henry Moore and Graham Sutherland. So if you look at some of Sutherland's murals, you can see some of Sorrell's influence, or he was obviously influenced by the same people. He'd actually probably studied with some of these people as well. So he had this sort of particular style that he used to do for murals. But from our point of view, when you look at his figures, they're very sketchy and not very historically accurate at times. But that didn't seem to matter. We remember his work for the atmosphere and the sort of, again, whether it's similar to that in the fall of the Roman Empire, which appealed to me. It's this very sort of melancholic and moody scenes.
Sun never shone in the past in his view of it. It was always gloomy. Even though I think I must imagine the rain. I always think it's raining in his. Occasionally you get sort of clouds part slightly and there's a little bit of sunlight coming through. But I think he was more buildings and towns and cities. There's that sense. It is such a distinctive look because growing up, almost any site you seem to visit, if they had books or postcards, there was usually seemed to be an Alan Sorrell image there somewhere.
Well, I remember the olden days when you used to visit historical sites, and the only sort of information for the visitors was usually an old gentleman in a hut.
Yes.
It was a volunteer, obviously.
Yeah.
And he would sell a few leaflets, and the Ministry of Public Buildings and Works blue booklet.
They were very good.
Which just had props, one illustration in, which would be an Alan Sorrell. He practically did all of those.
But they used to have those marvelous fold-out maps where you'd have a proper plan. They were the detail in them was remarkably good. I think I've still got one of the Kylean ones somewhere.
Yeah. Well, the Kylean painting he did of the legionary fortress with the barrack blocks and then you've got this sort of sunset or sunrise in the background, and that definitely inspired me when I was doing a painting of a site in the Netherlands, because it was literally just flat, completely flat ground.
Yeah.
And I just thought, how can I make this, more interesting? Suddenly, Sorrell's image pops up in the back of the head, so this becomes a sunset in the background of that.
Yes, it's strange how these things just feed in, don't they? And they're there in the back of your mind, and they're.
Well, as illustrators, we were always sort of not necessarily taught, but it was seen as a good idea to collect as many images of things from newspapers, magazines, etc., that you could as a sort of scrapbook. And this is what illustrators did in a lot of the times in the sort of 70s and 80s, is that if you were asked to do anything, even just in a commercial illustration, you don't always have models to hand or people that you can use. So you would use information from whatever source you could use, and you see it builds up with, in our case, with books and films and videos and other academics' work that you always refer to as inspiration and go-tos. You mentioned the Bishop and Coulston books, which are always my first sort of go-to when you're talking about armor and equipment, because you want to put it in the right context, the right period, and you just surround yourself with things like we have here to motivate you, inspire you, and help you create something new yourself. I think most of the artists I've sort of admired over the past and in the present have huge collections of militaria and costumes and props, which you dress people up in and use, constantly. And I noticed this was a common theme when you start sort of reading about these people, that there were very few artists who drew things straight out of their head. It was always inspired by something, and you use costumes for visual material. I noticed there was a series of books on Lady Butler, and she'd done some paintings of figures at the Battle of Rorke's Drift, and you could see some of her original sketches. And there was just little tiny details, like when a soldier was kneeling with the bayonet on his rifle, the empty bayonet scabbard bent when he was kneeling on the floor. And it's just those little touches which make things, more realistic when you come to do the paintings.
I was just thinking of Musée de l'Armée in Paris, where you have the long collections gathered by the various 19th century artists of uniforms. And that's, I think, the best collection in the world from that era, from that period of not simply French, but all the armies, because they were gathering this stuff to use for that very purpose. And it's, it was interesting to see how some of the colors had faded. And so that a lot of the greens look more blue and this sort of thing. But again, it's that same idea of trying to get it right, but also the sense of, all right, well, how would this have looked on somebody?
Yes, yeah.
So I just wonder, I mean, we'd be jumping forward a little bit, but perhaps if we now talk a little bit about your process of doing that, because you sent me some pictures as well. So we've got, for instance, the Vindolanda Gateway, we've got the Saxon woman. I don't know whether just talking about the research, I was going to say technical side, but that seems like the wrong word, but how you're posing a scene, working out perspective, scale poses, details like a bayonet scabbard that's bending because it's empty and it's pressing against the ground. Getting that sort of level of realism, the sense of authenticity about it, that it means that it's more than just a diagram. This is trying to take us to that moment in that place, that time, these people. So how do you approach it?
Well, with buildings, the first thing is, if possible, to go to the site itself and take reference photographs. And it helps if you're with the archaeologists. So naturally, with the Vindolanda, when I was commissioned to do some pictures there, I went round the site with Robin Burley. And we decided that they wanted a view of the gate at Vindolanda with the vicus in the foreground. So it was a chance to go up there, take some photographs, take some reference photographs, and then do an initial sketch of what they wanted, constantly in communication with the team at Vindolanda. And then my usual process is to produce a small scale model based on the plans and include some figures in it for scale. And then to carry on doing another drawing from that and send the sketches off to Robin and Pat Burley. And they would look at those and say if there was anything they wanted to include or something I could change. I mean, one of the fascinating things about that particular gate is that there's no ditch. So literally the vehicle goes almost straight up to the gate itself. So that's fascinating to include. So the scale models help with perspective, and you can sort of alter your view. I sort of look at different angles that might make it slightly more interesting. And one of the things with that is that you could get a shaft of light, sunlight might come between the wall and the Vicus buildings. So that was interesting to include in there. So that's, again, just little things from things you might not initially think of. And then just have a selection of figures from the sort of period in the foreground. So it's probably, I think it was early 3rd century. So you don't have the sort of classic Romans in there. It's sort of figures. And I like to include figures not in full armor, because I don't think soldiers wore full armor all the time, but to have them in sort of normal camp style dress, undress uniform, as we would call it in modern terms. And then finally, you have the final painting, and they can make and comments on that. So before it's finally finished.
I think we'll talk a bit more about the whole undress uniform, or that you're not doing everything in armor and helmets later on, because I think that's a very big and important thing, and it's also something you've promoted and sort of made clearer to the rest of us quite a bit. So we'll do that. So with Vindolanda, we've got this lovely picture of the gateway, and apart from the guide photographs I'll show you, I'll put in a few photographs of mine that I've taken there so you can see exactly where this is. But it's one thing I've always found going with people to a site like that, even a remarkable site like Vindolanda where there's so much, that looking at those stones on the ground, the walls, the low level, nothing is preserved to a great height on any site. The advantage of a picture like this one, of trying to say, well, look, you can see there, that's where the gateway is. The civilian settlement goes right up to the walls. These are the houses. They're these strip houses with narrow fronts on the road. It's, that's the sort of the prime element of property. So you're squeezing in as much as you can. To show a picture like yours can give people such a clearer sense of a place that it's, again, because so much has gone into making that image. So there are reasons why things are there and shown that way. But it brings it to life, and that's really the trick of trying to get people interested in the past, whether it's through telling a story or whatever, is to give that sense of, well, this is what it was like. This was here. It wasn't built as a ruin. This is something, it's not like we're just seeing what's left.
Yeah.
But perhaps, is it different when you come to do a picture of an individual? So you sent me some different stages of the Saxon woman for Sutton Hoo.
Yeah.
Doing that. So how was that process different? Obviously, you can't visit a person in the same way. So how do you go about that research?
Again, it was working with the archaeologist who it was from the textile laboratory in York. So they had a lot of information as regard the textiles. And initially they'd said that they wanted this woman. It was going to be a Saxon woman. Perhaps make a slightly regal looking, and a mother. So that was basically all I had to work from. So again, it was the process of I get someone to dress up in a costume which sort of vaguely resembles what they're going to look like. Make sketches from those, send the sketches to the archaeologist. The archaeologists make comments. And one of them was to make the hem of the skirt shorter, which then meant you got to show the feet. So I then needed to know what the footwear was going to look like. So they supplied information about that, and then extra little details with the costume, which they sent versions of. So then you work up the sketch and the illustration. It becomes more of a painting, and you continue to have this correspondence back and forth as to what they want and how things can be improved and changed. So it's an evolving process when you're working through this. And again, you try and put in as much information historically that you can find. I mean, sometimes maybe we put too much things in. We don't know whether everything that was found at certain sites would all be worn by one person. But in the Saxon period, it is generally, I think these figures that I was working on were based on graves. So you included everything that was in the grave that was found with the persons, which you don't always get with the Roman period. If you were trying to reconstruct a Roman soldier from Manchester, for example, with all the finds that had been found in Manchester, you'd have a naked man, essentially.
Yes.
2 pieces of scale and a belt buckle, and that's it.
Yeah, and you assume that wasn't how they were at the time.
It wasn't how they were at the time.
And as you say, that difficulty as well, the combination of things. I remember seeing a Spanish film set in the War of Independence, they call it the Peninsular War, for the Anglophone world, where there was a documentary afterwards talking about these rather odd-looking French troops who appeared, and the costume designer was saying, well, of course, everything they wear was worn during the period, and that's true, but you'd have cuirassier boots with a grenadier's hat and different. It was, yes, they were all from that era, but this wasn't in combination. And when you looked at it, not a terribly practical way of running around various hillsides. But you could see, unless you do that level of research and find out this is as far as we've got information-wise, and then it's best guess with consultation of the excavators, the people working on the site, and your own sense. One interesting thing while we're there, I mean, you mentioned they said they wanted someone who could look a bit regal in that. One of the very distinctive features of your art are the faces that are ranged so much, but they look like people. They don't. I mean, the worst of the CGI, particularly now the AI stuff, is that everybody looks the same and rather like a cartoon.
Yeah.
Yours don't. So how do you decide who's this going to look like? They're clearly. I mean, everyone's. I've had a couple of times when your artworks come up, people have always asked, there's questions like, I wonder who they are. People in your illustrations, you know, is this all your neighbors or something? Basically in the Roman army or wherever it might be. But how do you decide on that?
Well, again, it's a process that you go through. I mean, if you look at some of my earlier pictures, yes, I was using friends and family, and also, again, I said we used to use pictures from magazines and books. So there were a few actors that are in there as well. I think every illustrator at that sort of time does that. And yes, you get criticized because obviously if you have someone who looks like an office worker and they're dressed up in Roman costume, they may still look like an office worker who's dressed in Roman costume, and it doesn't quite work. So it's a process which evolves through your work over the years, and you sort of get to know, a look that people will look. I mean, it's like I used to be in reenactment. And not every
put a picture of that up,
not every reenactor looks like a Roman soldier, or to be fair, I suppose our perception of what a Roman soldier looks like. I mean, they should be youngish and fit for a start, and not a lot of reenactors are young and fit anymore. So yes, you go through this process of elimination, if you like. When I was doing something on the Byzantine costume, I did a book on that a few years ago. So I was looking at old photographs, old paintings even of Greeks from Greek history, to try and make them look not from the 21st century, but from an older period, and also the ethnic background of figures like that. But it's difficult. It's just like you look at a modern film today, and some people look great in Roman costume, and other people don't.
Same with Westerns. We were having this conversation before where somebody looks as if they've led an indoor city life and never been on a horse and others look the part. And a lot of the older films, again, you had that mixture, but many of them, perhaps because of so many appearances, we got used to thinking of them as cowboys or cavalrymen or whatever,
Yeah.
but they seem to fit better. And you can tell the difference if you look at war films made in the late 40s and 1950s, how the cast look the part, they wear the uniforms properly, they stand properly. As time goes on, you get more and more removed from that. But the cast of people playing it then, if they hadn't been in the war themselves and in the services, had at least seen people. They knew what they were trying to represent. And obviously we don't have that level of knowledge with the Roman period. You can assume, I mean, again, you have some reenactors who, God bless their souls, are not the fittest individuals to look like, or the ones that are rather too well-fed for some of the situations and the armies they're representing. But again, they can't do anything about that. It's so again, thinking of the Byzantine ones, because again, you sent me some pictures of the guides you were using for one of the illustrations there, where you were using sort of action man-like figures for posing. I mean, how do you do that a lot? Is that part of the process as well?
If you're using, I mean, particularly in that instance, the mosaic floor and the wall paintings in the background were going to be included as well in that scene. So it was very helpful to do a scale model with the floor and the wall in the background to the 1/6 action figure scale, and took various photographs of that from different angles, and also to see if you could get any lighting effects in that as well. So yes, if I'm doing sort of a more elaborate scene, I will use models and figures. You can see some behind.
Yes.
That sort of scale. And that's very helpful. And again, this is something I found out a lot of the sort of 19th century artists did as well. You were talking about the uniforms for the Napoleonic period. Well, two of my favorite artists, Alphonse de Neuville and Edouard de Tal, who did a lot of Napoleonic paintings.
Oh, yes,
They would very often have people in sort of costumes, but also some of the artists from that era used to use mannequins. And they would dress them up and again use different types of lighting to create effects. So it's an old tradition. It's not just something I've done. It's something I've learned from other people. I mean, other people generally. A question is, well, can't you use your imagination? Sadly, yes, I've got a very good imagination, but it doesn't always help me, draw things. You can't always remember. And again, it's that reference back to the bayonet. An empty bayonet scabbard bends, whereas if you were using your imagination, probably you just draw it straight. So it's a case of how much realism that you want to try and put into the paintings. I mean, one of the things I find very hard, and this is where I might rely on people like yourself, your books and things, is if you're doing sort of 19th century Western figures, when they're off duty, they can read newspapers and smoke cigars. And you'd include that in your paintings. But what did Romans do when they're sitting around? No newspapers to read, and I don't know whether they smoked anything at that period. So you are at a bit of a loss at times, and this is where you have to go for archaeological finds and include those if you can. But,
again.
Okay, so the next artist was John Kenny. Which probably most people won't know. But as we talked about before, he was the artist who worked on the Ladybird books. And his book, of course, Julius Caesar and Roman Britain, was obviously an early classic, which I liked and loved and read through many times till the book fell apart.
Yes, I think that's why I haven't got one anymore, is because the spine went eventually.
I had to bring mine up from online, I think, somewhere else, because mine was covered in ink. But Julius Agricola became an early hero.
Yes.
And so someone you don't like to hear disparaged and dragged through the
Yes, I still have a soft spot for him as well. It's true. It's partly that, and then I think that was one of the first, translated in that case, texts that I read in full was the Agricola. They had the Penguin edition of it you could read. And there was a book, what's it called? The Great Invasion by Leonard Cottrell, that was in our local library. And that was Roman Britain up until about Agricola, basically. It was Caesar first, and that In fact, I wouldn't be surprised. The edition they had there had a picture of legionaries, rather first century AD looking legionaries on board ship with Caesar's attack and the Aquilifer going over the side. I think it was very much the same style as those ladybirds, so I wonder if it was him. But that's thinking back decades. So
well, again, his legionaries have marched straight out of Quo Vadis and Ben Hur.
Yes,
no attention to historical detail there at all. And I laughed at he has a woman shopper in one street scene. It looks like she's from Milton Keynes in the 1950s. So the next artist is Ronald Embleton, or Ron Embleton, as he prefers.
And I was thinking, were you telling me that he did tend to draw more from imagination in terms of
I think he did, yes, because he has certain stock face characters which reappear in all his pictures. So whether he worked from models, I don't know, but he was very fast, so I would expect that he didn't. He just drew naturally. But his original style, he was trained at the Essex Technical College and School of Art, and some of his contemporaries. What have we got?
I particularly associated his stuff. There were What Soldiers Wore on Hadrian's Wall and The Armor of the Roman Legions, or something like that.
A very unusual style he worked with, which you wouldn't expect if you look at some of his earlier work. I was trying to find out who he was with, because he was in college with someone who was quite famous. Anyway, I can't find that. But yeah, he did magazines. He did some adult magazines.
I came across some of those when I was searching for his images online, and suddenly you come across all this penthouse stuff and the style. And one of the two of the images I saw had historical figures in with pretty accurate uniforms, or even some Romans. So but it was the faces were exactly the same as his Romans, and it's probably explained by nearly all his. Whenever there was a woman involved, she was usually rather pretty and striking. But was clearly that background was what was required.
Yeah. So he did he met apparently on holiday abroad Frank Graham, who was the publisher in Newcastle. And they seem to have hit it off, and they did this series of books together on Hadrian's Wall, which then led Embleton to do Osprey books, and he did this sort of classic Roman army type books. That's where we're familiar with. So yes, he based again on that on accurate archaeological information, as it was just coming out at that time, so he was ideally placed. But he did it very prolific again as an artist, and again probably very fast as a commercial illustrator. You need to be. I was never fast, which is why I've never become a commercial illustrator. And if you're used to working with archaeologists, work can go on for months.
Yes,
which I don't think publishers like very much.
No, exactly.
Details correct.
Yes, I mean, I remember it always slightly disappoints me now if you go to the Hadrian's Wall site. So there are hardly any of his postcards left, because especially when I first went, that was it. And I found some in one of the wardrobes recently. Lots of postcards I'd bought of different images, and they're in the Hadrian's Wall in the time of the Romans, or whatever the book's called. But they're interesting scenes, and I liked his look of the Roman army. In fact, there's something, even though it's probably now less convincing, ideas have changed on, but there's a lot of his, you had the classic cuirass helmet, mail armor, and curved or partly curved scutum. That look of a legionary, that sort of first century, which I suspect now people wouldn't necessarily draw Claudius's army invading Britain in 43 like that. But for some reason, that particular look has always stuck in my head. And it's again, I think because he did a lot of scenes, whereas, as you said, with people like Sorrell, the figures were incidental and vague and not really. These were more like some of the look and learn illustration, that's the thing, that they're often dramatic. There's the convoy going along in the bad weather, the pushing the cart through the mud, this sort of thing, some of the battle scenes, burning down a farmstead, these legionaries putting the torch to the thatch. it gives you powerful moments and distinctive, the sense of this frontier life that's not always very pleasant. So I think that combination, as he was starting to come to probably working closer with how ideas were developing among academics at the time as to how the army looked, that you were getting that, and you had lots of it. As you say, he was so prolific. But I suppose the other one that's always a disappointment is, for years you'd get at Housesteads the poster or postcard of his reconstruction of the latrine with the fellow sitting. And I remember for a long time, I think that was the best-selling image that anywhere along Hadrian's Wall, and you felt it told you a lot about the British, really. But now there's nothing like that. You can have postcards with a picture of it, but the few postcards that are left, of course, because again, people don't really send them. So that marvelous source of, you could pick these up and they were useful for reference later on.
Yes.
You just don't really get in the same way. You could get aerial photographs and things like that, which again, not practical for the present day. So Embleton, I suppose, leads us on really into Peter Connolly and his work that took it a stage further, where he was doing his own research, not simply dependent in the same way that you will go and look at the sources directly. And Peter, of course, the Roman army, I took out and kept on renewing from the local children's library so many times that eventually my parents got the hint and bought it for me. And the spine is rather weak now, but I still have that copy in my office next door, because of that combination of text, detail, and these wonderful illustrations that still, it's so much easier looking at a well-researched picture like that than trying to explain the same thing in words when it's about people and things. So I sort of have always seen you very much in that tradition, really, in that succession of trying to bring it all together and make it, they're much more than a diagram. These are very nice paintings, images that you feel there's a sort of story going on in a sense. It's not just somebody posing to show off, like a mannequin in a museum, to show off, this is the armor, this is the helmet. That there's a sense of a person.
Well, this is one of the problems with Roman figures, is that they're encumbered with these spears and the shield, and it's very difficult to do a variety of poses and different characters when they're stuck with these things. So this is why, I suppose, as a reenactor, that you need to wear something underneath the armor, and I think a lot of the reenactors were not so interested in the clothing. They liked all the fancy armor and equipment and the weapons. We have to realize, of course, if you're going out in public to display all this, that you need to wear something underneath. So this is one of the reasons I became interested in the clothing side of things. And then the other fascinating debate was, and still ongoing, is what color was the Roman military tunic? Huge disagreements and arguments with other reenactors, particularly other groups, as to what this was, and very important to reenactors that they're wearing the right color. I think most academics just sort of glaze over it and sort of wonder what the hell these people are going on about, because we don't have so much archaeological evidence.
Reached the point where we know we don't know.
Yes, yeah.
But I do find that when I'm sometimes asked questions, what was the shield design of this particular unit, or what was the color of this, and trying to say, well, the evidence actually isn't there, we don't know, we're guessing, and all this sort of thing. Often you can tell the person who's asked you is assuming, well, that you personally don't know. The evidence must be there. There's this belief that it's got to be out there somewhere. People don't realize how much has been lost from the ancient world. And when you get, rare color paintings of Roman soldiers, like the Terentianus at Dura Europus and the sacrifice scene there, of course they're not wearing armor, so we haven't got that. They haven't. And then you look at more recent things, going back to, you're talking about the Illustrated London News. It's quite interesting looking at late 19th century campaigns where you can see the sketches of the artists they sent out to the Sudan or to Zululand, and then what eventually comes through, and the details that you can tell that some are paying much more attention and others are, well, this will be good enough. It'll show, you know, I'll simplify it. It comes back to, again, that idea of what's the audience going to be able to cope with?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes if you make troops look as scruffy as they really were, it doesn't seem convincing.
Yes, we have that description of Septimius Severus's army marching into Rome, and the population of Rome obviously seeing their frontier troops for the first time.
Yeah.
In many cases, they're used to Trajan's column and the column of Marcus Aurelius, and suddenly this bunch of ragamuffins march in, and the population are horrified as to what they actually look like. And this is something that's difficult to convey to the public, that an army on campaign wouldn't look like it was marching outside Buckingham Palace in completely different uniforms, and the soldiers adapt and change things as they go on, as things wear out, and they make clothing from old bits of clothing, so they can have a very different campaign. I mean, you probably know from the Peninsular War that the British soldiers were eventually starting to wear local dress as the campaign wore on. So,
but you also, it's the, you know, there you start to have the details. So I remember being struck once by an article that was looking at uniforms that were being delivered to one of the guards regiments, the foot guards, in late 1812, early 1813. And the contractor was supplying these in hundreds or thousands. So there were lots of jackets for men under 5'4". Now, given that you had to be a minimum height to be in the foot guards at all, but they had enough tailors within the unit, they could recut the material. But the contractor had made a profit because you'd use less cloth, you provided the number of uniforms you were contracted to supply, but they were much smaller, and overall that saving. Or the discovery of Sir John Moore's army when they're retreating towards Corunna, and they come across boots that had been supplied by the British for the Spanish army, and discovered that there was a very thin, sort of paper-thin bit of leather on either side of the sole, and the rest was mud and clay that had been put in there. And then again, they didn't realize that till they'd worn them for a few hours. But somebody is fiddling, and you have those couple of stories in Livy where people are supposedly supplying the Romans in Spain during the Second Punic War, and these contractors are actually scuttling the ships and claiming compensation for non-existent supplies that they would have delivered. And this comes out. So even there, at one of these great moments where, you know, Rome has its back to the wall, nearly everybody is doing the right thing and is behind the state. There's still some on the fiddle.
Yeah,
and that complexity is to what you have when you're actually on the spot, when you realize that maybe it's actually worth dressing like the locals because they know what's best in this climate. And also that's what you can get. That's the cloth you have. Those are the boots, the shoes, whatever it might be. I can't help thinking, I mean, my take on the color debate, in part with tunics and uniform, is that I would be amazed actually if there was one standard that was universally worn by everybody for centuries. And I suspect supply, but also units wanting to be different. Something I mentioned when we did a talk with Gareth Glover a while back is he published the papers of one of the Clinton family inspecting units before Waterloo. And he keeps complaining about them adapting their shakos, their hats, to tilt the brim down and then also have it lower over the ears. They were cutting bits off and shifting it. Now, I've never seen that in any illustration, not mentioned anywhere else, but he goes to unit after unit and has a real moan about this in the report. But it's a fashion. It's a fad. They thought this looked cool. That's what they were doing, to be a proper soldier, to look really wary. This is what you did. So I would be amazed if this sort of thing is not going on all the time. And given that we know the Romans have some incentives to embellish bits of your own gear, your own equipment, whether, the stories of Caesar and others encourage you, the more expensive it is, the more you look after it, this sort of thing. And that ability that you feel there's a lot more detail. There was far more to this. And given the scope of time, but also distance we're dealing with, these units existing, there's got to be. But again, you've brought out that quite a lot, or you've tried to, in your work and your illustrations on this.
Yes, I mean, one of the things that is mentioned in Roman sources is the covers for armor and helmets. But of course, we assume we don't have any representations of these. So if you're doing a reconstruction, then it's purely based on bit of guesswork, has to be said. But there are depictions or accounts of soldiers having covers on their helmets to stop the sun shining on them if they're in an ambush, for instance, that you don't want to give yourself away. What that would look like and what material it was made, whether it's something that's ad hoc on the spot or whether it's part of the kit that they're given, is, again, we've no idea. And I very often say when you're doing reconstructions like this, and particularly what I do, is that it's like working on a jigsaw when you don't have all the pieces and you don't have the box cover as well to know what you're actually trying to reconstruct. But that's, as you say, it's very hard to get across to the public. And as I mentioned before, if you're doing a soldier from a particular site, it can be very difficult. I tried to do a legionary from your part of the world in Caerleon, based on all the finds from Caerleon itself, and it wasn't possible. And that's such a major site which has been massively excavated in recent years. So I had to include equipment from Wales. Again, it wasn't possible to do that. So then I spread out to England as well. And again, it still wasn't possible. And eventually bringing in bits and pieces from Germany and other parts of Northern Europe, and then perhaps some things which are finally you just have to copy from the sculptures, the original sources. So again, a legionary from Caerleon wasn't possible to reconstruct a single figure based on the finds from the site itself.
Or you're dealing with a bog find or something like that. That's probably always got to be the case, hasn't it?
Yeah.
It's
I mean, one of the things, if people would say, what would you like to be discovered? One is a set of toy soldiers.
Yeah.
From Roman time. Didn't Roman kids play with Roman toy soldiers? We've never found any, as far as I know. It would be nice to have a wooden painted set from Egypt. And the other thing would be a closet full of clothes, a cabinet full of clothes from Vindolanda.
Yeah,
would be really helpful to discover.
Because again, it's you spoke a little bit before about how do you depict these soldiers? It's standing guard, parading, fighting, those sorts of things in a sense are easy, but that's not what you're doing for most of your career in the army. What you're doing, and particularly if you're trying to illustrate, as you did with the Vindolanda picture of the gateway, where you've got the civilian settlement runs right up to the wall. Many of these army bases, they're not places where the army plans to fight. They're where you live. They're garrison towns. A lot of your time spent there, and wearing armor all the time, carrying your shield all the time, your pilum, your hasta, whatever it might be. It would be rather like assuming that a modern infantryman permanently wears his webbing, his helmet, full gear, has ammunition for the rifle that he's always carrying. And we know that most of the time, none of those things are true. There are lots of duties you've got to do that require that. So one of the things I think to a great extent really you've pioneered is trying to show Roman soldiers when they're still in the army doing things, but they're not doing the obviously military bits that tend to spring to mind, and that in fact the majority of time for most soldiers, particularly under the Principate and later, it's garrison duty. You're helping to build something, you're administrating things, you're acting as a police force, or you're in the barracks loafing around because you don't spend all your time even there training. You've got to do other things. You eat, as you say, you can't nip behind. I do remember seeing, I think it was the Arbea group doing a display at Chester's years and years ago. And several of the reenactors during one of the break the performances all nipped behind the trees to have a quick smoke. And although it was obviously wrong in the Roman gear, there was something natural about it, of the sense of a group of soldiers sort of just having the quiet moment of relaxing. But as you say, what's the equivalent in Roman context for that sort of thing?
As reenactors, the press always like to catch a photograph of you with an ice cream.
Yes, yeah.
But as reenactors, you quickly realize that wearing full kit is not something you'd like to do going into the local pub. Because you're banging into things and knocking things over, and the sword gets in the way when you're trying to sit on the seat. So you quickly realize that they must have worn something else for normal everyday life. And I just done an article which is in the current Ancient Warfare magazine, which
all right,
is
so that will be what, the January issue or the December issue?
December issue.
December issue, right? Okay.
On the sort of clothing and equipment that the immunes and the might have worn, the librarians and the sort of some of the standard bearers of the junior type, the tesserarius and the optio and the beneficari.
Yeah.
What they might have worn in camp. And again, one of the unusual things I found out, because I was doing a lot of work on the Egyptian sites, the Egyptian forts, something that doesn't come across in lots of accounts, is that the senior officer at one particular fort was a standard bearer. So he was in charge of the camp. No centurion, no optio even. So that's something you wouldn't normally expect, that the standard bearer is the guy in charge.
The problem is because his title is signifer, presumably. We tend to automatically think he's walking along carrying this big, highly decorated pole, whatever he's doing, and yet you think back to Wellington's army, and the rank of ensign in most regiments is the starting point, the junior commission rank, and they do take turns to carry the colours of the battalion when required, but that's that requires 2 of them out of the maybe 20 or so you've got in the battalion, perhaps more. It's one of the problems, because so much of the evidence for the Roman army comes from a name like immunis, somebody immune from ordinary fatigues, those, but then that varies as to what they're actually doing, and so much is you're called a signifer, an optio, tesserarius, taking around the tessera, the password, written down at night, this sort of thing. We get very rigid sometimes because the only information we've got's a name, and we sort of assume that name must always apply to everything you do, and permanently, and that there can't be hangovers and tradition. Obviously, the British Army's exceptionally confusing to the outsider in terms of where you still have a fusilier or a Kingsman in some regiment. These peculiarities that have come through that tradition, but it doesn't mean that you're armed or trained or equipped any differently. It's simply once upon a time, being a grenadier or a fusilier meant a different function. Being a rifleman, same thing. It doesn't anymore, but that, because of that sense of identity, that tribalism, and the sense of making you want to feel special, that you belong to something unusual, something unique. If that's there in the Roman context, it's hard for us to spot. But
we see it in some of the paintings and the frescoes. I mean, this is the unfortunate thing, is that all that sculpture that we have from the Roman world would have been painted, of course.
Yes.
And we've lost all that, and that would have been extremely helpful and given us a completely different view, I think. If it had survived. So we just have these 1 or 2 frescoes from the Middle East.
And the mummy portraits from Egypt.
Yeah, I've got the mummy portrait behind me.
That's what I was, partly was he staring right at me. So I was thinking that, but again, there are those ones with baldricks, with traces of a sword belt on them. And I think, so we are assuming they're soldiers or former soldiers. But again, we don't know who they are.
They were found, when they were first found originally, they were thought to be members of the Ptolemaic dynasty. And then it was decided that they were soldiers. And then obviously, as they're in colour, with lots of coloured clothing, they must be officers. It's finally come down that they're just soldiers, possibly now. So again, this is how interpretations evolve over time. And I've discussed in this article and in several publications a group of portraits like the gentleman behind me who aren't necessarily called soldiers. It's usually described as a man in a cloak and a tunic in most publications. But the standard dress of a civilian man would be a white cloak over a white tunic. So this is what made this group of portraits stand out for me, is that they look very much like soldiers in contemporary tombstones, with a cloak slung over the shoulder and a brooch very prominently displayed. And then when I finally found a number of photographs of these portraits in colour, because they'd all been published before, but in black and white. So I tracked down what they were in colour originally, and that revealed quite a lot of interesting details, which hadn't been noticed before. So I've incorporated this in in several publications, and it's a feature in the latest Ancient Warfare magazine, as to whether this is any indication of rank or display that the soldiers have. I'm not going to say it's a uniform based on a certain manual, that if you're an Octio, you wear a blue cloak and a white tunic with some coloured bands on. I'm not going to go that far. We just don't have the evidence. But it's possible that the more duties you had, the more rank you had, you displayed this on the Roman uniform with bling, we would call it nowadays.
When you're seeing someone who's not from your unit, that you don't.
The sound had broken up.
Right. Okay. We'll go back.
It's back. It's back now.
Is it back? Okay. I was just thinking, because I know you've been playing around with these ideas, exploring this for quite some time, and gathering all these little bits of evidence that none of the rest of us had spotted. And but you do have to think, coming on for this idea that you're not going to be armor, crest, helmet, all this sort of stuff all the time. How do you know? There are obviously basic things like which side your sword is hung. You can tell whether somebody's a centurion or not, this sort of thing. But presumably there was some way of knowing fairly quickly whether you were talking to somebody who was higher rank or more senior than you, at least to some extent, so that you didn't abuse him, or you obeyed, you showed suitable respect, whatever it might be, because otherwise somebody comes and starts telling you what to do. I'm sorry, I'm just going to have to pause again there. Again, you have other periods of history where it wouldn't always be easy to tell who an officer was. The English Civil War, something like that. They might be wearing civilian clothes rather than the uniform jacket, but there is the element where, yes, you're in a group of people, you all know who everybody is, you'll know who's going on, but it does seem to me to make sense that there would be at least some idea. It might not necessarily be as neat as modern systems where there are specific insignia for specific ranks, but to give an idea of this is how, okay, he's probably a centurion, let alone he's probably a tribune or something like that, but to give an idea. And also, from a civilian perspective, though it might not be so obvious, I mean, we know the beneficiarius might have his ornamental headed spear, but on the other hand as well, a sense of who this person is that's ordering you around or asking you to do things, or you're trying to get help from. All of those possibilities, a different way you're interacting with the rest of society a lot of the time. There are detached soldiers serving in all sorts of capacities. How do you know who they are and how important they are? This sort of thing.
I've read in certain accounts that people say, well, visually, within a century, the soldiers would all know one another, and they would know the centurion by sight. So that's seen as one way. I mean, obviously, if you go with analogies of the British Army, then obviously their officers would have what we would call a posh accent, as opposed to the young squaddy. And the way he would dress and his uniform would be of a higher quality, would be more tailored than the ordinary infantryman. And probably this went on in the Roman army as well. I mean, when you're talking about the gap in pay that's even a junior centurion would have compared to a legionary is
huge.
And that must be reflected some way in their kit. And I think we've lost a lot of that with archaeological finds. If you were trying to do that as a reenactor today, you're talking some of the officers must have had gold and silver equipment, whereas the ordinary soldier might have his bits and pieces on the belt silvered, but probably an officer, it would be silver and gold. And this is something that's lost, and we don't have the distinguishing equipment between ranks of centurion. There's a different grade between this very senior centurion and the junior centurion. We've tended in films and popular culture to lump them all into one guy, one character is like a British Army Sergeant Major. And we forget completely that centurions had a huge range of duties, and some of them were very important within the community. I mean, that's actually recognized in the Bible, isn't it? That when Jesus speaks to a centurion, he knows that he says he tells people what to do, and everyone knows to do it. He has this faith. He's a man of authority. And we have the guy from Carlisle, don't we, who's a regional centurion. So obviously he was very different to just the ordinary centurion in a junior century. So he must have had some sort of form of instantly recognizing that this person was this person, and he had this authority to do that. And then again, even on a very basic level, you have the immunes, and someone says, well, now I'm a librarian. I can stand around all day and watch the other guys break rocks. So he must have had some way of identifying the fact that he's a librarian and he can do that. That his general would know, or another officer would know that he can do this sort of duty. On a battlefield, of course, it wouldn't matter because you're wearing your kit and the general would know who you were. But when you're in the camp, there must have been some way. It's just like on board a small ship. We all know who the captain is, but he still has to have a uniform with the captain's insignia on it to inform people. And I think it's also natural that as a soldier, you would want to inform people who are not within the military unit that you've achieved these things. You're entitled to wear this. It's like wearing the medals and wearing your insignia, the pilot's insignia, the paratroopers' boots and the badge. But this is important, not just within a military context, but in a civilian context as well. And we also have instances of the soldiers from other periods dressing their children up in miniature versions of what they're wearing. And there's some slight evidence, of course, that the Romans did this too. I mean, the most famous example being Caligula in his miniature soldier's uniform and the miniature boots, from where he gets his nickname. We lost the sound again, Adrian.
This is happening. It shouldn't normally do. Is that better?
That's better.
That's better. Right. Okay. It's the edge, I think, of the stand I'm on. You wonder occasionally. I mean, again, it's having these glimpses into a world without all the background, without all the sense of it. In some of the mummy portraits, would you get somebody who's just a local lad or yokel man who wants to be seen to look a bit military and a bit, so he's dressing that way,
well,
it's depicted that way.
Yeah. People do that today, don't they? Modern.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's
clothing quite fashionable at the time.
And in the 18th century, for a lot of gentlemen, they have very military style coats and this sort of thing, even though they'd never gone anywhere near. So you never, and again, it makes you wonder. You have that tradition you get in the literary sources of some commanders who dress like an ordinary soldier.
Yes.
So that's depicted. Would you have, at different periods and different units, and perhaps different personalities, the officers of this particular unit at that time really show off and want to look spectacular, whereas others make a show of looking not scruffy, but more ordinary?
Yeah. Caracalla, for example.
Yeah, exactly. So there are probably there's this whole world beyond of the meaning, the association. There's the practical element of, yes, this is a tunic, this is a cloak that keeps you warm, does the job, armor that might protect you. But then, what are you trying to present? How are you trying to be seen by yourself, by others? A lot of Roman equipment, like a lot of military uniform, you can't help thinking some of it's there just to impress women, to look big and shiny.
Yeah.
The shoulder reinforcements, yes, they're very practical on armor, but they also make you look bigger. And, you know, a modern military pullover, is an army one, is tailored that way to go tighter in the waist and make, the idea is epaulets, that was what they were for. It was to make you look broader soldiered, more manly. And you'll get to the assumption is you will fight better if you swagger along thinking that you really are, you know, 10 feet tall and wonderful in every respect. It's so you feel a lot of this is happening. It's just harder for us to know what it meant because, of course, we don't get the detail. We don't get the, as you say, the somebody opening, let's find somebody's wardrobe in Vindolanda with all, you know, this is what I wear at various times and all the different bits and pieces. But we're just guessing. But it's always good to have that sense from, you know, the wider interests, and because you've produced illustrations for quite a few other periods as well, where you're getting different information, so you know far more about what somebody's wearing in the Old West in America than you can possibly about a Roman.
Yeah.
But it feeds into how you think about the Romans then as well, I would
That's
think.
right. Well, this is, I mean, one of the things I'm more interested in these days is the costumes in films and television. And of course, it's less controversial for me that you can't argue what they might have worn because it's there. As you can see, there's still some bits of it surviving.
Yes. So take us through. We've got on. Let's start with the mannequin and the leather. Remind me where that's from.
Yes, well, the leather jerkin and the helmet is from the Greatest Story Ever Told.
Ah, right.
What's interesting about the leather jerkin is the strange square patch in the middle with two buckles on, which don't serve any purpose whatsoever. And that's based actually on an early interpretation of what the lorica segmentata looked like by a chap called von Groller in the late 19th century. And this is how he thought the lorica segmentata worked, with a leather jerkin underneath, with the shoulder pieces and the girdle attached to it in some way. And this is what they've actually done in the film. Sadly, my costume is missing the shoulder pieces. But yeah, underneath, that's what was used. The helmet is fiberglass.
Ah, right. Okay, we can't quite see the helmet unless you adjust your camera slightly, but. Oh, there we go. It's a bit. Yeah, there we go. Right. Yeah.
So that was used in Greatest Story Ever Told. It's very unusual. It's the only time you ever see that helmet. So if you find one, then you know which film it's come from.
Oh, right.
The most famous version, of course, being the one by John Wayne as the centurion.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
And even though his armor is in leather, I think it was based on Faculis, the centurion tombstone from Colchester.
Yeah,
because it's the very long shoulder pieces and a very elaborate belt. And that's not surprising because this is the costume designer is a name who I spotted comes up time and time again in films where the costume is looking very interesting and authentic. And that's a chap called Vittorio Nino Novarese, an Italian scholar who was also a military historian and wrote books on the Napoleonic uniforms. And his work appears in quite a number of films from the sort of 60s up until in the 1980s. And one of his latter ones was the TV series Masada.
Yes, I did a video on that, and they've got these similar patches.
That's right. Well, I think it's the same costume, which is probably from the Fall of the Roman Empire movie, which still survived. And we had a little brief discussion before about two of the characters from the Masada TV series, one of whom was the young centurion who falls foul of Peter O'Toole.
That's right, when he's about to burn down houses, isn't he?
That's right. And the gymnastic prisoner.
Yes, that's right, yes.
So that was a young Kevin McNally.
No, I hadn't twigged until you mentioned that.
Yeah, he appeared in I, Claudius. So I did a painting of him from the film, which I've sent you an image of.
Yes, we'll put that up now as well.
I met him at a Comic-Con a few years ago, and he signed it for me. So yes, we had a little brief chat about what he was up to in the film. And the second one was the why was there an American?
Yes, you've answered that question that puzzled me. Bringing in the bath, isn't it? It's that scene.
That's things in the bath, and it turns out that scene was filmed entirely in LA in the studios. So that was the actor Patrick Gorman, who's well known for being in Gettysburg and Gods and Generals as General Hood. But yes, he was a Roman legionary for a day, and they brought over a costume from the TV series, and he filmed his scenes over there. So again, I corresponded with him a few times and sent him the original painting, which I did of him as the legionary from the film. And he signed that one too. So hopefully these paintings signed by all these actors that I have will be more valuable than those just signed by me.
Well, it's nice though. And again, I certainly hadn't connected because obviously I've seen Gettysburg, Gods and Generals lots of time. They're marvelous films. I'd never associated him with Posada, but
he's got a long beard, so he wouldn't.
Well, exactly. Yes. Yeah. Even so, and just a lot of time had passed by then.
Yes.
So, and then let's see, the armor behind you. So that's
this one. Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's from Constantine and the Cross, or Constantine the Great, an Italian movie in the 1960s. And again, that survives. I mean, it's endured quite well. It's nearly as old as me.
Is that fiberglass as well, or
no? That's brass.
It is actually brass. Oh, right. Okay. I mean, I know it.
Yeah, it is an attempt to again reconstruct the lorica segmentata, but it's in 4 pieces.
Right. Yeah.
I think as an archaeologist will point out that there's probably about nearly 30 pieces to a lorica segmentata.
Yeah.
So they've skimped somewhere.
I remember seeing the film as a child and being shocked why they. I can't remember whether I saw it in color or not. It might have been on a black and white television. That then here we are in the 5th century AD, and people are still wearing sort of lorica segmentata, but not quite. And I think fighting with a rectangular scutum and a gladius, isn't he? As far as I remember, he shows them how the Romans fight or something like that. But it's interesting how this stuff gets created for particular films and then reappears or gets reused.
Well, I think you can see soldiers wearing this same style of armor in a recent TV series called AD.
Yes.
The Bible Continues. I've got some still photographs of those, which are showing some of the guys wearing this sort of style of helmet, and some helmets and things from earlier epics, from the Samuel Bronston films from Spain. Some bits and pieces from Spartacus are in there as well. So there's collections of this armor which they reuse time and time again. And I think there was a recent film, Risen, with Joseph Fiennes. And I think you talked previously about throwing the peeler in film. And I think that's one of the few films where they do throw the peeler.
It is. It's a nice little scene of that skirmish. It's quite well done, and they use the test judo to storm up the wall, running up it, just like the circus games as they're supposed to. But even though it's an isolated, well, not less than a century of just legionaries on their own, nobody else. It's interesting because it's more than they probably had to do for the theme of the film. But obviously somebody thought, well, let's try and do something a bit different, because it isn't like most ancient battles you see that tend to follow the same pattern, and inevitably people set fire to things in most of the movies. And they
have that discussion in the Charlton Heston film, Antony and Cleopatra, where there's a scene at the end when the Roman officer has to get into Cleopatra's tomb. And Shakespeare says 1 minute he's outside the tomb talking up to Cleopatra, the next minute he's in the tomb besides her. And Shakespeare doesn't explain how he gets there. So in the film, they devise this system where the Roman legionaries suddenly make their shields into a step formation. And the officer runs up the steps and gets into the tomb. You have the guys holding the shields up, and the next one's holding it higher up.
One on the right.
To run up. But if you know from shields of that period, that's pretty difficult to do because they're very curved.
Yes. It'd be a challenge, wouldn't it? When you have them, you've got to do it in one take and not just, could we do that, go again, sort of thing.
It's easy to do with a flat Roman shield, but very hard to do with a genuine curved Roman shield.
Yes.
And in the test judo scenes they're using these very small shields. So they're actually having to crouch to get behind them because shields aren't big enough.
Yes, it's strange how the test judo has this fascination for filmmakers. I think once people have heard about it, they think, "Oh, that sounds cool." I remember
standard movie trope, isn't it?
It is, yes.
I know setting things to on fire.
Oh yes, gosh, yes. That's, they can't resist that. It's even if you're going to advance into the forest or whatever you've just set on fire. It's the same as the drabness. Roman soldiers rarely, particularly in more modern movies, they tend to look drab, dark. They're not colourful. There isn't that sense of dressing up for a battle that you have Plutarch has Tigranes of Armenia saying, "Oh, you can tell the Romans want to fight because they're sort of polishing their gear and putting on their crests." That sense of what was in Napoleon's army, you could never be too well dressed to be a corpse. Let's look as impressive as possible and try and frighten the enemy as well.
Yeah.
Instead, it's all very dark and grim.
Any movie in the ancient world these days, everyone wears brown or black.
Yes, there's
lots of comments about the recent series on Harold and William of Normandy.
Yes,
and the King series, and all the Normans and the Saxons are all in black or brown. And we know from archaeology that sadly this is complete opposite. They're in very bright colours, even ordinary people. Again, it's a fascinating thing. People go on about the purple. That's only purple is worn by Roman emperors, but there were fake purples.
Yeah,
and different types of purple dye that you could get from other types of shellfish. And even at Vindolanda, they found some purple on a tunic, and that was probably not an emperor who was visiting on the off chance. It was worn by almost everyone, and quite a lot of the later tunics have all got purple in them of some form or of some type. It's fairly common.
See the ancient world as colorless, it's the bare marble. It's not, we don't think of the statues as painted, we don't think of the buildings as painted. It's this sort of very later version of what the classical world should look like, that's all almost monochrome in some respects, and then drab in terms of, it is an odd obsession. Everybody, especially the sort of the hard men in films, whether you're Vikings or whatever, you've got to wear black now. You've got to look a bit like a biker, basically, seems to be the in the same way. I mean, again, we talked about this a bit before when we were chatting. Very rarely will people keep their helmets on in a movie, particularly if they're any of the main cast, because obviously a helmet, while protecting you, does make it harder to see who you are. So that, again, the first thing you probably acquire after a shield before body armor is likely to be the helmet, because that's obviously part you wish to protect, and yet it doesn't fit with how Hollywood or visual battles go. Therefore, it's, like many other things, is out the window altogether.
Well, the classic is the complete loss of formation. Immediately they engage the enemy, and it all becomes individual duels, in which, as we know, probably the Romans would lose against a huge Celtic or Germanic opponent. Their success was down to the teamwork and the formations.
But again, like everything else, because it gets repeated again and again and again, not only do the filmmakers naturally think, that's how you do it, it's the audience expects it as well. It's like I was watching recently the old Errol Flynn Robin Hood film with that marvelous duel with Basil Rathbone going down the, but you don't wield medieval broadswords like that. But actors are trained to the fight scene. You're basically, there's a fencing background, and it's all about, generally speaking, parrying with your sword is not such a great idea, because that's a good way to break it. So it's, you have other things like shields and this, but again, that's how people expect it to be, and therefore that's how it will all be done. So it's, I fear
Hollywood seems to have this great fear that if it's authentic, it becomes like a documentary, and documentaries don't sell tickets.
I think some of and it's the other thing is that, from the little bit of involvement I've had in a few things, so many decisions have been made before they get to the point of historical advisors, technical advisors, this sort of thing, and they're committed to certain things. There's also fixed ideas of directors, people like that. This is what I want. This is how I see it. And it's very hard to shift any of those things. I'm very proud on the whole. If there's a BBC drama documentary called Hannibal, Rome's Worst Nightmare, Alexander Siddig in. I'm very proud of the Battle of Cannae in that, because I was the historical consultant on it. I wasn't there, but I sort of gave some opinions and some suggestions. And the Zama is pretty good as well, but Cannae particularly. But at one point you have a Carthaginian cavalryman riding along, and there's a Balearic slinger riding pillion on the horse, and the rider ducks down and the slinger shoots a sling bullet sort of over his head. And this had got into the script somehow, and I kept saying, look, this is complete nonsense, nothing like this would happen. But the answer was, well, it's been storyboarded, and I think they just liked it. And as far as they were concerned, it was showing this is how cunning and professional Hannibal's men are compared to the Romans. So it's I go with low expectations to most movies or TV series now, and I'm pleasantly surprised if there's some good stuff in there, because sometimes they do surprise us. They do come out with some good stuff.
I still love them, no matter how bad they are.
Exactly. I mean, and you've are you working on did you say a book on costumes within films and the Roman army, or just more generally ancient world?
I did a presentation a few years ago for the Roman Army School. And unlike you, I can't stand up and speak about it. I have to write everything down and read off from a script. So I practically wrote 15,000 words for this talk. Wow. So that's the basis of the book. So it will be on the Roman army on screen, and going into details about the sieges, battles, and artillery, as well as just the sort of weapons and equipment of the ordinary soldiers. And some of the enemies as well that appear in various films. There's the stock enemies that the Romans have in movies. So it'll go into quite detail, but it won't be a seriously academic work. It'll be hopefully a lot of fun and talking about things. Because again, as people who aren't involved in the film industry, we don't always appreciate some of the things that they have to do, and go back into continuity is one thing that we don't appreciate. And also some of the faults and problems that they have getting extras. Charlton Heston goes on about using some of the extras from Spain in a cavalry charge, when he says they're all told to stand still because the horses won't go near them. But of course, as soon as the horses appear, the extras all run off. And then there's another one where they made equipment for the film Caesar and Cleopatra in 1944. And the film crew went out to Egypt with all the kit that had been produced for it. And unusually for a British film of any period, really, money was no object. But sadly, as it was being filmed during the war, equipment was in short supply. So they'd made the shields essentially out of papier-mâché, coated with a fish glue, which the Egyptian extras found was edible, and they thoroughly enjoyed them, and they ate all the shields. So they had to make a whole batch of new shields again. So that's something that doesn't happen every day.
Oh, no, exactly. Well, I think I mentioned before the another project I was on, again, Hannibal related. They'd had costumes manufactured. I think they were filming in Tunisia or something like that. The costumes have been manufactured in India, and there'd been some confusion over sizing. So all the Roman costumes were delivered for very short men, and all the ones for the Carthaginian Hannibal's army for very tall people. So it required very careful staging not to make one army look like a group of midgets being sort of having sand kicked in their face on the beach, sort of thing, by the bullies. It was that. But again, it was a simple thing, but they have to deal with what they've got. And make it work. And you can't see from the final version that this was the case, but it's yes. I mean, I think we think of ourselves, and inevitably, we'd love somebody to make the perfect film or series just for us and just for the enthusiasts. And that economically, that's certainly not viable. You can never make a profit that way. So it's
well, sometimes they get really close, and
they do. It's
Master and Commander. You must like as
gosh, yes.
And we talked as well about the Battle of Britain. It's fascinating to see real aircraft, which you don't see in modern films now. And they had a large collection of aircraft for that film, and it works so well.
Exactly. It's even. It took me a while. It was only when I'd seen the documentary, because most of the scenes with the Germans they filmed in Spain, and then they moved production to Britain for some of the later scenes, but they only brought 2 Heinkels with them. So when you get
legal requirements, I think that was
basically you
London.
so that a lot of the dogfighting scenes, when the usually Spitfires, you occasionally get Hurricanes are in and out, the formation is broken up. There are only ever 2 Heichels in shot, but it still works. It's still more than you normally get. And it, for me, well, I've got a long rambling video about this and other films on period already. It adds that authenticity. Now, I remember sitting with a friend who'd gone into the RAF and he's now retired, but was as a pilot, pointing out, oh yeah, look, that's Duxford, and this is where they filmed that, and going through the different scenes. Or he was the one who pointed out to me the bit where you can see, now are they Spanish? You can see roundels on the Heinkel underneath the paint scheme. When one of them is taxiing, it's just clearly they painted over as well as they can, and normally you can't, but just the light struck it in that way. The same as I say, the Blu-ray, and it'd be nice if they did the full 4K sometime. You can see that when they're showing Hurricanes coming in formations to join the big wing, later on the rear ones are Messerschmitts, because you can see which again they'd added the bits on the tail because the later Messerschmitts didn't have them, but they were trying to make these look like on which the Spanish version was based. But it's that's the thing. There are so many good films that have at least moments or scenes where there's that atmosphere that sticks in your mind and is powerful.
Like Ridley Scott's The Duelists.
Oh yes, I think it's actually it's somewhere up here, I think, unless I've moved them around or something.
I think we had high hopes when it was announced he was going to do Gladiator.
Yes,
he's gone to so much trouble to get things right in The Duelist that we can expect good things in Gladiator, but it wasn't quite.
But then a difference that in The Duelist you're never dealing with more than half a dozen characters in the uniform, so you can actually order them specifically, and they will be right. So it's again, even with the Napoleon film, it's not what historians would want. There's lots of license, but it nevertheless is very colorful. It's striking. Maybe there'll be people who'll see that and think, oh, I'd like to know more and read more about it. And then in 10, 20, 30 years' time, apart from just being interested, they might even produce some terrific research or some new study of that. So you never quite know what those sparks were going to be. You were saying, looking back at some of the inspiration for you, some of them aren't that realistic, even for the time. They hadn't done them, but they've gone into the head. So, I mean, the other one you sent me as well, and I can't remember which artist did this, was one of the Reverend Audrey railway stories, the Thomas the Tank Engine, as they're often known, and Duck and the Diesel Engine. I can't remember which artist that was.
That was the John Kenny.
Ah, right. Because that was actually the first hardback book I ever bought with my own pocket money, was Duck and the Diesel Engine. And in recent years, I found the copy, and I took it when I was doing readings at my son's school at various times for World Book Day and all this sort of thing, especially for the younger classes. One thing I would do was Duck and the Diesel Engine. But coming back to it 40 years after I'd seen it before, I remembered all those pictures. There's a power to an image that I think it's so direct to us that, again, the illustrations, whether it's, I hadn't seen that one before. You showed me of the cavalryman with the revolver up on the mantelpiece behind you, but others where there's the legionary trudging along on the march with his, the pole and the backpack. One of yours, which it reminded me of being on marches in the territories and being cold and fed up and carrying this stuff.
That goes back to me. It was the Amadee Forestier. Did the painting when he's got a legionary soldier with the backpack. And unlike Trajan's column, where the backpacks are stuck about 10 foot up in the air, which is clearly impossible. He shows it just hanging over the shoulder, which is authentic. And that was in 1927. So he was more in advance. Lots of people did that. But yes, as you said before, in some of the 1950s British movies, you had people who were acting in that who'd served the war, or at least had done national service. So they looked the part. And I think I mentioned to you in one of our earlier chats that the flight controller in Angels 1-5 was played by the actor Ronald Adam, who was actually a flight controller in World War II at Hornchurch. So, of course, he knew what he was doing in that film. It was literally his day job. And then, as it turned out, I found out he was number 78 on Manfred von Richthofen's hit list. he'd survived that. So he'd got through World War One and then got into World War Two.
So he flew a Sop with camel, was that?
He was in a Sop with camel, so he was shot down but survived and was taken prisoner. And it's just those sort of experiences you don't seem to have with modern movies and modern movie.
Well, again, fortunately, we've all lived a much calmer life, and we haven't been. But it was the case, you know, they'd all done it, but it wasn't just the cast; it was the crew, it was the directors, it was the writers. You know, you have films like Appointment in London, the Dirk Bogarde one about Bomber Command, written by the fellow who did the script. I think had flown over 100 operations with Bomber Command, and it's the little there's no fuss made about it, but you have in one of the mess scenes when there's the squadron celebrating, there are a couple of West Indians there, and no fuss, no made at all, but just that was what Bomber Command was like. This is a reflection of it. It's not paraded, but it's simply done. And the same, you've got the Australians and the South Africans and the Canadians and that strongly international element that the RAF had become, or I mean imperial to a great extent, but it's done entirely naturally. This is how it was. It isn't trying to make a point. It's simply, we want to talk about the story, the lives of these people. Therefore, let's make it realistic. And there's an authenticity. I mean, you get it with some American films. There's one, I think it's called Battleground from late 40s, early 50s, about the Ardennes and Bastogne, where again, I think at least one of the cast had actually lost a leg during the war, but they just look like soldiers and they moan. And the way the scripts had been written, they're moaning, they're complaining, they're joking with each other. It's
that's probably one of the only things that you can get close to when you're doing reenactments is that you can moan about these places, or it's cold, or it's wet.
Yeah,
and you perhaps sympathise. I mean, obviously, you don't get real combat, and we never experienced that, thankfully. But films do sometimes supply little lines and jokes that you can use. If you go to Carleon today, where we used to stay when I was in the Ermine Street Guard, we used to always go to a little scout hut. And then friends of ours used to come together with lines from the Battle of Britain. Well, why on earth are we going to Carleon? And someone says, oh, it's not a bad little place. And you say, oh, no, I've seen it. It's damp tents and a squalid little hut with dead flies.
Straight out of Michael Caine. Yes, exactly. Was it? Well, you won't have the Germans looking in. I don't blame them.
You won't have the public coming. And we say, oh, you won't blame them.
It's the same. I mean, from my perspective, when I've written some of the novels, and again, you're trying to get a sense of that humor, of that camaraderie, and the discomfort of it, but also the things that get you through it, what you're trying to do. It's
did the same thing with when my first book came out. We quoted lines from The Charge of the Light Brigade. And he said, oh, he's written a book, you know, not a diary, a scientific work to do with soldiering. I'll not have some damn novelist in my regiment.
I always remember, it stuck in my mind that it's a book called Morale, and it was written by a serving army officer in the 60s about the Scottish Rifles, the Cameronians they later became in 1915, Neuf-Chapelle. And it's a study that's arguing, you know, where the battalion came from, how they experienced combat. But he talks about meeting an old friend that he'd been to Sandhurst with afterwards. This friend comes up and says, I hear you've written a book. He said, yes, I have. And the reply was, I bet it's a bloody awful book. That's always in the back of my mind when I give copies of mine to somebody.
There's a nice little scene in Gettysburg as well, isn't it? When
yes.
says, I've written a book. He says, okay, he said, I don't have time to read it.
Anyway, we probably ought to start wrapping up, because otherwise we'll just chat away forever. But I think we'll put something in the description of this. Let's see if anybody can spot the different figures on your mantelpiece behind you. Spot them all. You took me through them. I got a few, but I didn't get all of them. But I think, I mean, it's one of those things you're working on the history, the reality of how the Roman army looked, and other periods as well. You're doing a lot of stuff about the Old West. More recently, you've done other things. So, you're talking about von Richthofen and people like that as well. You've illustrated lots of different things, and you're looking at the how we perceive it, because you've got the movie version and there's the on-screen version, and how that becomes something so fixed that often it's easier if you're talking to people and you can say to them, no, that's from a film, it's not the evidence for it, but at least they know where it is. That's the big thing at the moment. Is that the main project at the moment is the book on film, or are you, I mean, you've just done a cover for Military Illustrated.
Can you just see that?
Let's see it a bit better. Yeah.
It's like it's
come higher.
Near the size.
Can you come a bit higher with it?
Sit down.
Up rather than, that's better. Now we can see it all. Yeah. Yes. Well, I'm very, people who go back to some of my earlier videos will see your painting of a 3rd century cavalryman, but now it's framed and there's a reflection of it. So I don't tend to use it in the pictures. But I'm very proud to say I am the owner of a Graham Sumner original, which has pride of place in the lounge. Although just next to it, a little bit further on, because there's windows next to it, I've got a picture of me on horseback. So whether I'm trying to sort of aspire to be this heroic figure, I don't know. But I think the Roman looks a bit better than I do.
Yeah,
so have you got other things working on at the moment? Sorry,
projects in the pipeline and in progress. Is another book on Roman military costume clothing, going into more sort of pictorial detail than I did before, so using a lot of the original sources. So there'll be a lot more illustration based than text wise.
Right.
The second one is, as we discussed, is the Roman army in film. So they're the 2 big projects, and of course anything else that pops up in between this. The Ancient Warfare magazine cover was one I've done recently, and I'm doing some illustrations for the Roman Conquest series, which will be on Germany, Germania.
Right. Okay.
Which is the next one. So they're all ongoing things.
When will the books be out, or is that still?
As soon as possible.
As soon as possible. Right. Fair enough. No, that's fine. That's.
I mean, that was quite interesting that you were going through a series of your own videos as well on films, and I thought, oh gosh, Hadrian's telling people all these things well before my book comes out.
Well, yes, but I lack the information. I'm just sort of watching it and thinking, oh, that's quite nice. Well, we did talk about, and hopefully we'll be able to get you back on, and we'll do one on the fall of the Roman Empire. Let's go and talk about that, omitting some of the very long scene periods where nothing happens in the film. But we could talk about the army in it and its presentation of Rome and forts and front, because it was probably the first film to give you a Roman frontier.
It's also the first, I think, one of the few films which shows how opulent, how big the Roman world was. I mean, literally, when Alec Guinness does this speech at the beginning of the film, he talks about the mountains of Armenia and the forests of Gaul and the prairies of Spain, and you see all these things in the film, even though it was all just filmed in Spain. They talk about all these other places.
That's right. They have the long scene, don't they, of where James Mason is prompting him, like the nomenclator, the slave that stands behind you, telling you the name of someone in the Senate.
Where's this guy come from? Oh, he's Britain. Oh, yes, hello,
Britain. Anyway, I think if you're willing, it would be lovely to do that. So sometime, but I think we probably ought to wrap up for today and just say, Graham, thank you so much for coming on. It's absolutely fascinating to hear about how the images we're so familiar with, because I think most of the viewers there will know your work already, or will very soon come across it as soon as they start looking at the ancient world Roman army. And Ancient Warfare magazine as well, highly recommended as a good broad coverage of so many different themes. How we get to the end result of all the work, all the thought, all the consideration that has gone into creating that image that then makes you think even more about, well, what's going on, why are they there, who is this, what's the life like, the sense. It's trying to recapture that lost world. It comes back to, as you were talking before, we're all trying to assemble this jigsaw, but we don't know what it should look like, and we haven't got all the pieces, and we're guessing. We're not even sure whether all the bits we've got are actually the same jigsaw.
Exactly.
So, but anyway, just to say again, Graham, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you. Yeah, I look forward to working with you again. Yeah.
Marvelous.